Hi there and welcome. It's Trisha at the Inky Planner, and I have been asked to do a sort of stamping 101 tips and tricks kind of a video focused on stamping in Planner versus other projects. And there's a lot of great content out there on YouTube. You can certainly find more additional information if you search that on YouTube, but I did want to sort of consolidate a couple of tips right here on my channel, and by no means do I expect that this will be comprehensive, but at least maybe a couple of good take-home points for stampers and planner girls. So let's go ahead and start. My first tip is in seasoning stamps. So when you get a brand new stamp set, right out of the package, it may not give you the very best impression the first time around, and that is not any fault of the stamp. It just needs a little bit of seasoning. There's a couple ways to do that, so I'll walk you through those steps. Okay, so the first way that you can season your stamps is by using an eraser. So you can just use a simple pencil eraser, or if you have an art eraser, anything will do, whatever you have on hand. Just run the eraser over the surface of your stamp, and you will see that the stamp goes from being really shiny and clear to sort of cloudy looking or etched. And I don't know exactly what's happening when you're doing that, but the result is that it makes the surface of the stamp like grip the ink better instead of having it pool up on there, and you seem to get better images. So I'm going to go ahead and show you. Just get some ink and ink my stamp up really well and stamp that down. So you get a really nice crisp image, and I think there's even, you can see on the edges, I don't even think I got the eraser on there very good, but it comes out really nice and solid and crisp. This is especially helpful for bold stamps that have thick portions, thick lines on them. If I were to take another stamp, now this is a new one, and ink it up without using the eraser, make sure I ink it really good, you can see that the first impression is not going to come out nearly as good. And hopefully that is on screen here, but the bottom one did not come out nearly as solid because the ink just doesn't seem to cling to the surface right away. However, if you don't have an eraser, simply stamping repeatedly over and over will give you better results each time. So I'm going to keep going with this stamp, and I'm going to keep going over and over, and every time you do it, it gets better and better. So you can see, make sure I'm getting nice, good coverage. And I'm going to do my final stamp right here next to my first stamp. And again, you'll be able to see the difference there. So this was the first time I stamped it, and here is, 5 or 6 times later, and what a difference you get in coverage and how crisp the edges are and everything. So both of those processes will just sort of season the surface of your stamp and make that ink grip on a little bit better. I have also seen, although I haven't tried it myself, people use Versamark. So if you use an embossing ink pad first, or sometimes even like a StazOn or a darker ink pad, and then clean your stamp off and then try it with your regular ink, that can help season your stamps as well. So tip number 1, season your stamps when you first get them. Okay, my second tip is choosing the right block. The biggest mistake I think you can make here is putting a little stamp in the center of a really big block, for a couple reasons. First of all, when you ink up your stamp and you're holding the block out here, your pressure is way out here on the edges where you're holding it and not in the middle over the stamp. So you can end up rocking or twisting unintentionally and giving you like a smudged image. And I'm not sure how well you can see it on screen, but this one has like a little bit of a halo out here on the side. So it's just not giving me the best results. Not that you can't use it, but when you have a smaller block available, I would recommend it. The other hazard of using too big of a block is if you're using a full-size ink pad. I'm going to use one of my Stampin' Up! Ink pads here. And you're inking up your image, and then you go to stamp it. I got ink unintentionally around the outside of my block, and it ended up making a smudge on my project. So that is something that you can avoid easily by choosing a smaller block for your smaller stamps. Also, I would say that getting a block that's comfortable for you to hold. I love the ones that have these little kind of, I don't know, curvy edges so that you can kind of get your fingers in there and they don't slip, and they're nice and thick. These are from Stampin' Up! As well. These don't have the scallop curves, but they do have a little indentation that your finger fits right into, and they're really nice and easy to hold. And then the other difference in your block choice is choosing blocks with grid lines when you are trying to line something up, or you know, make a square nice and straight on your project. Grid lines can be really helpful. So I do have some without and some with, and then I try to make the appropriate choice. When you're doing a border stamp or a sentiment that is longer, you know, maybe grab a more rectangular shape. So just choosing the appropriate block can be very helpful in getting the best image as well. Okay, my next tip is in choosing the right ink for your project. And I'm going to show you a variety of inks that I have here. I don't have every type of available ink or every brand, so I can only comment on what I have used, but I do notice a difference in the results depending on what my project is and what needs I have. So a dye ink will absorb into your paper and dye the fibers of the paper, whereas a pigment ink sits on top of your paper almost like a layer of paint and doesn't absorb down into it. So for bleed through, it's going to be a little riskier with dye inks than it is with pigment inks. The flip side of that is that it takes the pigment inks longer to dry, so you have a little bit more risk of smearing or smudging before it's completely dry. So you have to weigh those things out in your timeline and your project. But within the dye ink family, I have found hybrid inks, which sort of have the properties of both. They're fast drying like a dye ink, but they don't seem to seep as deeply into the paper, and I have really good luck with these not bleeding through a nice weight planner page. So I use 32-pound paper from my own, my local office supply store. These inks are from Simon Says Stamp, but I know some other companies make hybrid inks as well. I think My Favorite Things do, and there may be others. But these little ink cubes come in gorgeous colors from Simon Says Stamp, and they don't seem to dye through the paper nearly as much. Also, for whatever reason, the Stampin' Up! Inks are not hybrid, but they don't dye through as much as my true dye inks do. And I think it just has to do with the formulation and how they're made. But again, depending on the weight of your paper, you may want to practice a little bit and experiment with your available inks and see what works best for you. The other comment that I can make, if you're not talking about bleed through, is just about getting a crisp image. I'm going to go ahead and use a pigment ink here. These are just these little cat eye color box pigment inks. And I'm going to ink up this stamp and get it nice and juicy so that you get good coverage. Okay. And you have to be a little bit more careful, I think, with a pigment ink. You can get beautiful results with a pigment ink or a chalk ink. These are similar to pigment. They just have a little bit of a more of a powdery matte finish. But I would warn you that when you are using a pigment ink, to me, it seems as though the ink is a little thicker and more prone to smudge a little bit or to smear. It's almost like it's slipperier on the paper. So when you go down with a pigment ink, you hold it there for a minute, but don't use such a heavy hand that you risk twisting your block and ruining your image. You just want to use, nice solid pressure to get a nice result, rather than really pushing down and you can end up twisting a little or smearing because you've got sort of a thick coating of that pigment ink. And then what you end up with, see if I can get this on screen, but you can end up with like some rings or like dark little edges around the outside of your image. And that's a problem with pigment ink sometimes. It's not the ink, it's just sometimes that when you're stamping down, it's a little slippery. So just be careful when using pigment inks to go straight up and down and not use so much pressure that you're going to lose control of your block. All right, my next tip is the surface that you're stamping on. So see, I've got my hard desk, my work surface here, and I'm not putting my paper straight on my desk. I'm actually putting something underneath it that has a little bit of give. I have seen people use just a spiral bound notebook, and that has a little bit of give, or a big stack of papers. People use mouse pads. I am using this Sizzix pad. It's called the Stamper's Secret Weapon, and it does sort of feel like that because it just really has enough give to it that you can get a nice solid impression and the full surface of the stamp hits your paper, but it's not so bendy that it collapses and ruins the look of your image. So you can see it's not like really flexible. So when you're picking a surface, again, practice on whatever surface you have, but rather than doing it on a very hard desk or something, try to find something to put under your paper with a little bit of give to it. And if you're working in a planner that has bound pages and you cannot pull the pages out, I've even stuck this whole thing like right into my planner. If I pull my planner over, I have even taken this and just slid it right under my planner page like that and stamped like that so that I get a better image. This also helps if you tend to put dimensional items in your planner, because sometimes after you get a buildup of either washi tape or stickers or any little dimensional embellishments that you might use in your planner, it can leave ridges when you try to make a stamped image. So this will separate any dimensional elements from the page that you're working on. Now I happen to use an A5 ring bound planner, so I don't have that issue now. I just pull my pages out, but I know a lot of people use Erin Condren or other planners and love them. And so that can be a tip for how to get good impressions within your planner. Other comment I should make before I put the planner away is if you are stamping in your planner, let me get to a page here. Well, I guess I can use this page. If you're stamping in your planner and you cannot remove the pages and you need to stamp in the area that's closest to the rings, just make sure that you take your stamp and you kind of put it on the far edge of your block. Because if you put it in the middle of your block and then you're trying to get the stamp where you want it, it's going to bang into these rings and sort of ruin your chances at a good impression. So if you put the stamp over on the far edge of your block, then you can stamp close to the block, close to the rings without ruining your stamped image. Okay, my final tip is just to do with the motion of actually stamping. So for very beginner stampers, sometimes people have a tendency to want to rock back and forth or kind of roll their block around. And I think people are trying to make sure that, every little bit of the stamp is hitting the paper. But really that can end up with a smudgy image with not very good crisp edges on it. Because as you're rocking back and forth, you can actually lift a bit of the stamp away, and then when you come back down, it's not going to go down in the same place. So you get a little blur there. So my recommendation is to ink up your stamp really well and then just go straight down with nice solid pressure and straight up and get as crisp, clean of an image as you possibly can. And again, that's going to be helped by this soft surface that you're working on. Okay, my next tip is just in the overall care of your stamp. So the better you take care of it, the better impression you're going to get and the longer it's going to last for you. Cleaning your stamp after every use is always a good idea, and then keeping it on its plastic backing sheet and even in a little sleeve or something is always a good idea. For cleaning your stamps, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. People use just like a wet paper towel. People use baby wipes. There are cleaner, like spray cleaners out there. There's all kinds of options. My personal favorite is this absorber, and I think this has been sort of a hot new topic. I think Lawn Fawn sells one of these now. I think they call it the Stamp Chamois. Mine is actually just from like the automotive department. You can get these on Amazon, or you can get them at Target or something, but it's just called the Absorber, and it's just a little foamy chamois material, and you get it wet but not soaking, and it's nice and pliable and super absorbent. So the advantages to this over some of the other methods, in my opinion, is that when you run this over your stamp, first of all, it doesn't leave any lint behind. There are no little fibers here that can get connected to your stamp surface and ruin your image. Secondly, is it really doesn't leave a lot of moisture behind. Sometimes a fresh baby wipe is super juicy and it leaves your stamp really wet, and then you kind of have to make sure that you're drying it off before you ink it again. So it doesn't leave any moisture behind. And third is, as much ink as this sucker gets all over it, it's just reusable over and over and over, and it never transfers ink back to your stamps. So I use it over and over, and then what I do is I just put it in like a little snap lid resealable container. So when I'm not at my desk, I seal it, and that keeps it from drying out. And when I am at my desk, I just leave it wide open for the whole session, and it works perfectly. So I really enjoy using that absorber, but there's lots of different methods. Baby wipes, like I said, are fine. Just watch out for the lint and maybe run your hand over it to sort of dry your stamp after using it to make sure there's no moisture on it. All right, so my last little tip is what happens when you get a little smudge on your paper. It happens to everybody, right? So we get ink on our fingers, or if we're rocking our block, or we've chosen a big block for a small stamp, again, you might get a little ink in a part of your page that you didn't intend to. A lot of times we're ready to scrap our entire project after we've worked so hard on it, and you just don't have to do that. There's lots of ways to recover from a little oops. One is to just restamp your image on a sticker paper. If you were trying to stamp something and it didn't come out great, well, stamp it again on a sticker paper and just lay the sticker right over the top. It might seem super obvious to you because you just did it and you're focused on it, but I promise you, you look back on it, later, you'll hardly even notice that it has another layer there. The other thing is just get creative. I feel that sometimes covering up mistakes or recovering from them can lead to my most creative solutions. So, maybe you could take this little yellow smear and make it into a sunshine on your page, or turn it into a flower, doodle around it or something. So you can get creative with it. And then third, this little tip I picked up, and this is just like a sanding block that's used for manicures. It's for your fingernails, but it works great on paper, especially with pigment inks, but it will still work with dye inks. And you just sort of sand over the area where you've had your little oops. And I think what this is doing is it is actually like buffing away a layer of the paper fibers, and those fibers that had some ink in them, you're sort of scrubbing off. So you need to do this gently. You don't want to put a big hole in your paper, but just nice, gentle circular motions. And look at that. You can remove your smudge. Now, if you rub your finger over this, it's a little bit of a texture change. You know, your paper gets a little rough right there. You can smooth it out sometimes by using an eraser over that surface. That'll get all those little paper pills out of the way to make it smooth. But visually, it's a huge improvement. So if you have a little smudge, this is a great way to salvage a page and get that ink off of there. Like I said, it works beautifully with a pigment ink, but it will work with a dye ink too, especially the quicker you catch it. So just a little tip for trying to recover from a mistake. So those are my few very high-level beginner tips for stamping in your planner. Like I said, I am not inventing the wheel here. Lots of people, I've learned these tips from other people. I'm just sort of consolidating them all into one place. There's a lot more information about this out on YouTube that you could search and learn more, but hopefully there is a little something that you picked up from this video that will help you next time you go to stamp in your planner, and you'll remember, oh, I'm going to check the right block, or something stuck with you. So I really hope it was valuable and interesting for you to watch. I'm also considering doing a secondary video to this with a little bit more advanced techniques for stamping. Partial inking, or like ombre inking, masking, using stamp positioners, maybe second generation stamping, things like that, but a little bit more like a level 2, a stamping 102, if you will. So if that's something that is interesting to you, would you please let me know, comment down below, and let me know if that would be something that you guys would want to see, because I'd be happy to make a video if there's enough interest out there for it. Also, if you have suggestions about content for that video, if there's something that I didn't cover here that you would like to see, or if there's a technique that you've heard about and you want to see it in action, just comment below. I'm going to kind of put together a little list of things I'd like to cover in that video, and I would be happy to put out another follow-up to this as well. So thank you so much for watching. I always appreciate it. I appreciate any comments or likes that you have. Please subscribe to my channel if you like what you see. I'm going to keep trying to make the videos happen. I'd like to do another plan with me in the near future, and check out my other videos too. I'm always happy to be crafting and sharing fun ideas with this awesome community. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day.